Okay, welcome to the Arizona Blockathon on Saturday, October the 27th, 2018. We're at the University of Advancing Technology that hosts our events here. We want to thank them for allowing us to gather here and so forth. Pardon me one moment. Oh, I know what it is. It's this. So today, the format of this is we have talks in the morning, and then we'll go to lunch, and we'll see how many people attend today, and we might break into teams if there's enough people. If not, we might work on some projects as a group, basically. So the purpose of the Arizona Blockathons is to invite people with development skills to collaborate with one another, create projects, sort of come up with ideas, and then possibly carry those forward using some of the tools that are available to us now, like the equity crowdfunding, the Arizona FinTech Sandbox. We're going to talk about that a little bit today, and possibly bring the ideas and prototypes into a full prototype mode, and then move that into the next level, which might be into production. So that's the intention, and the other intention is to just basically bring other people, bring people up to speed on the development skills and talents to create projects in the blockchain space and decentralized web space. So does anybody have any questions, any comments before we get started? We'll kind of go around the room and introduce ourselves. Please let us know what your name is, what you do, and why you're interested in the blockchain space. So start with Bill.
Okay, I'm Bill Maher. I build embedded devices. So lately I've been working on integrating blockchain into the stuff that I do, mostly like factory robots, that sort of thing, just regular embedded stuff. Yeah, but I mostly focus on EOS, and I would create a private chain for EOS instead of doing all the crypto crap with the coins. I don't deal with the coin part of it. I'm just using it for it's a better blockchain to use.
And what is it that interests you about EOS, Bill?
Well, mostly it's free to use.
So they don't have gas like in the Ethereum?
Doesn't have gas, doesn't have all of that crap that slows everything down. There's no gas, there's no mining or none of that stuff. I define whatever it is that I want. EOS claims to have governance. It's something you can attach on. And you could create a side chain, do your thing, and then add it on if you want to the regular chain. And it's much easier. It's a lot easier to use now than it was when it first started, of course. Now that the exchanges are up, so you could play around with the crypto coin kind of stuff. But what I'm focusing on is adding EOS and IPFS to my embedded devices as replacements to existing stuff that I have worked on. So what that means is that you could plug in multiple computers, plug it into the wall, and have it all synced up. And now all of a sudden you just need to plug the wall in, plug a computer in, you get a USB drive, and it'll synchronize to everything, completely decentralized. So you just have multiple, it's almost like the Borg, they just talk to each other, sync up, and you could be anywhere and be able to pull this off. You just need to have a connection, which is what I'm also working on, is the broadband mesh situation.
Cool. Yeah. And how does EOS come to consensus if they don't have mining?
What do you mean?
What's the consensus mechanism behind EOS? If they don't have mining, they must have some way to come to consensus, which is usually like a round robin group that like Hyperledger has some sort of round robin, pass the hat for
Yeah, you have a similar round robin, but right now it's just set, the regular EOS mainnet is set at 21 so-called block producers that are part of it. But there's no reason you can limit it to 21, or in my case, when I put one of these side chains together, I have a consensus of 1, basically saying, okay, here's this one guy. And then as you plug more and more computers in, the other ones get involved. So it's basically however many block producers there are, the more equipment you plug in, the better your vote.
Okay.
Which is a completely different consensus model, but that way you're kind of voting with your hardware as opposed to voting with your cache.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have more people getting it, it's like saying in the room, everybody gets to vote like a proper, you can put in a node.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to buy more equipment and plug it in, there you go. Which is, I guess, the same as the consensus you would get with the mining pools, I guess, with Bitcoin.
Well, not exactly, but anyway. So what do you need from the community? What would you like to have that you don't have?
Well, once I get to the point where I can create demos that I can show off that actually is useful for somebody, I like to release it to the community to get feedback, basically free testing, to be able to get enough, enough usage in it, just to be able to show, okay, this thing is going, kind of more like a beta program. But a lot of the stuff I have, the customer that I sell my stuff to, they would do their own thing because they typically don't want to talk about it publicly.
Yeah. Okay.
I will be putting together stuff, like with the hackathon. When I get up there, it'll be something that we could show. So the hackathon.
Is that an EOS hackathon?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be an EOS hackathon. But like I said, I'm more focused on, the back end stuff rather than the coin part of it, which is, there's a lot of noise going on with that.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks. Julian.
Yeah. I'm Julian. So I'm working on a privacy layer for Ethereum. So taking the Zcash technology and applying it in a way that it can be used by all the pre-existing tokens, at least apply to fungible token standards. So ERC 20, 223, 677, as well as 777. What else would you like me to cover?
Just what is it that interests you about creating anonymous tokens? And then how could the community support you? What do you need?
The problem with basically Ethereum right now is it suffers from the same problem as Bitcoin that Zcash tried to solve. So Bitcoin, it's not really anonymous, it's pseudonymous. So you do a transaction with enough chain analysis, and if people aren't careful, it's easy to determine who actually initiated the transaction, especially since a lot of people going through exchanges that actually collect all this information. So some powerful third parties can get their hands on that information and figure out that, hey, you have these assets. So basically, if you come down to Classic Crust Pizza and you're not careful, we can see that you've been sending like hundreds of thousands of dollars to Mexico, which we think is
a problem.
Yeah, it makes it, normal money does not behave that way. You don't just hand someone a $5 bill and they know everything about all your transactions for the past 2 years.
But the bank does.
Right, but not the merchant that you're dealing with, as well as customers watching you pay.
Yeah.
Cool.
They said the bank does, but that's a slow process, and if you're applying for a mortgage, like them going through transactions, yeah, it's not a speedy process.
Yeah, and anything the community could support you and Tunnel with?
Oh yeah, so Tunnel is the name of the project, and we're releasing the paper either Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Don't have confirmation yet which day it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's coming up, and once the paper's out, we'll be opening up our code so people can help contribute to it, and
cool.
get excited about using it.
And you're headed over to Prague for DevCon.
Yeah,
so
flying out tomorrow night.
Yeah, awesome. Well, please post the link to the paper on Desert Blockchain and go from there. So cool, thanks. Matt?
I'm Matt Oxendale, less technical minded, more of an entrepreneur. Have primarily spent my time with car dealerships up in northern Arizona. Have some commercial real estate, and I'm really here just, I don't have a specific project in blockchain or decentralized systems, but I want to see what we can create that's a real world application with something blockchain or decentralized. Of course, being a car dealer, I got a little extra interest in Adam being here at Local Motors and seeing if maybe we can put together a project there that's just, you know, in my area, so it's interesting. But I'm also one of the members of the Arizona Blockathon putting on these events.
Yep, the LLC that produces these. Cool. Adam, go ahead.
I'm Adam Plaster. I'm a lead engineer for EV powertrain at Local Motors for R&D. I've been with the company for over a year. My main responsibility is doing the low voltage and high voltage systems on Ollie 2.0. So pretty much everything that makes it run on electric and everything that powers and runs, allows communication with everything on the vehicle. Guess you also probably want to know what I want to get out of the community and how I got into this.
Yep.
So I got into blockchain and the curiosity with it because I was doing another startup on the side called Kiwi, which was basically algorithms for pricing and tracking carbon credits based on what people spend every day. And there are some crossovers there for this whole idea of taking something that was a very complex problem that wasn't being solved by government and create a tool that consumers could basically enter into that marketplace. And then there is a way of just transparency of tracking and pricing this stuff. And blockchain allowed to have that distributed ledger, so you can automate and track all this stuff. There was no argument or no missing paperwork. And I got more and more of this stuff when I was doing with Kiwi. I even stuff with some clients was looking at building server-based applications for reverse engineering stuff that was coming out from like Bitmain and stuff. People wanted to build server farms for mining pools. So I got more and more into it, and for me it was this very interesting concept of getting rid of a lot of dead weight loss in the economy for just the service and transaction fees and tracking of stuff in the finance world, and a lot of stuff that was issues during the subprime mortgage mess that were never really taken care of. So how do you really track, validate, income, payments, transactional history? How do you do it in a fast and efficient way possible without having this huge army of people to verify that? And really in the case that most of these people were not just doing their job. So there was just a lot of interesting things with blockchain technology that allowed this whole automation of the financial system. And then, where it comes back to Local Motors is just seeing a really interesting concept with this whole co-creation and collaboration in the launch forward community, and being able to see a way that blockchain can allow a way of having a more efficient way of dealing with these contests where people who contribute to design or technical support or some other level of infrastructure, it can track those contributions and basically help structure the value system of those projects. And that's why I'm here with the issues with the project ideas for the FinTech Sandbox and the VC crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk elaborate a little bit on Launchforth for the people that don't understand the dimensions of that?
So there's since I've been with the company, it's been restructured. There's Local Motor Industries, and there's Local Motors, which manufactures vehicles in their microfactories. But the core thing about this is Launchforth. And what Launchforth does is it basically does this co-creation projects to reach out to its community, come up with design concepts for applications that people are looking to produce a product for. And so there's a whole community of all these different ideas that are coming through. It's a contest, and whoever has the best idea wins the contest. They get prize money, and it goes from concept to then a prototype. And then when it gets to the prototype, then an army of other super nerds come in there, and we basically look at this design. We basically start building the prototype, and then take it to beta, and then pre-production. Do our initial validation to then move it over to production.
Mm-hmm. What you're experimenting with in terms of enterprise and crowdsourcing ideas and contributions, I think is as compelling as the Ollie and the products that you're creating. And I think that's a huge piece that if we could make some progress with that, we could open up all kinds of opportunities.
Yeah.
So
I'm kind of questioning, does it really work? Because I was at Teledyne, and I was actually in charge of something similar to what you're talking about, where I basically what I call the super suggestion box, which was, people all throughout Teledyne, which was pretty big industrial outfit at one time. They would put in these suggestion boxes, and then the whole team, like you're saying, would get together and review every one. And there was some good stuff that came out of it. But the big problem we had was that we had a lot of resistance within the organization about doing any kind of changes, because once you have it as a big company, it's really hard to change anything. And we can talk offline, but I'd be curious about what results you actually had, because I know you guys what they do is actually rent out their system. I don't know if you call it renting, but you did a similar thing for the military, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering what the results were, in terms of the overall effectiveness of what you guys did.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about, because I've had similar stuff at other companies where they do that, or they have they might get together and do the powwow. The challenge there is, how do you determine value?
mm-hmm.
When you're trying to do a voting system, when there's a lot of noise between each focused concept or idea or point that's trying to be made. So there's a lot of noise there. You don't have value. In this case, you have some initial parameters that are set. The community's feeding in ideas. There's initial value set by the prize money and the funding by the partners. But my thing here with some of the concepts with doing the crowdfunding, doing the fintech sandbox, is that you can start basically establishing overall value of that project in the marketplace, and that gives a more definitive idea, definitive message of what's being tried to be produced. And why I think there's more of an efficient, mechanism there than just having everybody just give their input. And sometimes it's just it can be totally random and not productive towards what your central project or goal is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the prize money, is that determined by like a committee or a vote of the whole community? Okay. So I think there's another approach where participation is like measured in points or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
But then instead of having some definitive tally of votes, I think a random draw could be conducted among the points, and you distribute assets and so forth that way.
So there's this centralized problem there that seems like, how do you value people's contribution? Right. Because you could say, you get all philosophical about it. From did these other people's contribution lead to the end idea that got it done? And it's we'll get into our slides later with this whole thing of a vesting process.
Mm-hmm.
Those, but you could do that. I wouldn't say randomized, but you would have to have some sort of algorithm that just says, okay, these are when this idea was set. This is how much it proceeded. these are what other things retreat off of it, and you can try to assess value and assign tokens that way.
Yeah, which I think is somewhat problematic, because it always involves some sort of human judgment, which can be gamed.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing with doing this also with blockchain, is that people can't game the system.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to find some sort of automated process where you're not really telling them the core algorithm, but you're just trying to say, okay, these are just the rules of like when you contribute how much. But I mean, if you're saying a randomized algorithm picking people like a lottery, there's still this whole thing where you get it into, a freeloader problem where it's just somebody just put one thing, just randomly put a comment in there, and all of a sudden, the algorithm's going to pull their entry.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we want to try to avoid, because it's not,
it's
once again, a problem, like it dilutes value then.
Yeah. So have you done any collaboration with like the ASU Law School regarding this?
I know there was one gentleman from the other week that, talked about it, we try to get through this initial vehicle development, pass it on, and go, circle back on this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of chicken and egg.
So a lot of this stuff, I think you would understand it most with vehicles, like you can build anything you want. The biggest challenge there is like, how do you find a way of being able to pay for it? Getting people access to credit. Even with like 5 figures, that's still a challenge for most people. Like when you start getting a 6-figure, valued vehicle, like you have to find some way of doing credit, some way of managing cash flow, especially since these things are really focused into helping people, managing a business where they're trying to augment, or add value to the service they're already providing.
That's the push towards a driverless car thing. Having a driverless car that is owned by a big company, where you don't get involved with the capital situation. That's what they were pushing for. Saying having a driverless car basically allows people to use the asset without actually having to go out and buy it like it was a house. It's like, the whole situation of rented by the hour.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be like a social economical like experiment here, because you're dealing with this whole thing with, some of Gen X and a lot of Gen Y, with just this, cash flow issue. Like some haven't recovered from the Great Recession. There's a heavy amount of student loans. Usually these cash distributions out of their income, usual monthly income, would go to a mortgage payment or a car note. And if they're putting that towards, student loans or whatever else, like, there's a large amount of personal debt now that they're finding. People need transportation services. In some cases, you can't expect the municipality to do it because they're already debt and people don't want to pay higher taxes. So there's a business case there.
Yeah.
And, even in the case where, cars are, in some cases, I hate saying it, like they're pretty much the same as they were a decade or 2 decades before. The only thing that's really changed is like industrial design, but most importantly, where the value has been like trying to be added is that you have more technology in there, so more infotainment. You have some levels of autonomy, so like, automated stop if you're not paying attention, park assist. But you're starting to cram all this technology into it, and then like it gets down to the core value of what people really need, and that's just transportation. So why would you spend, 25, 30 grand when you just go and maybe get a subscription service for like maybe $1,000, $2,000 a year?
Yeah. I think
why don't we continue the introductions, and then we'll just go right into your talk and presentation, because all of this dovetails together. So thanks, Adam. Marjan, yes.
Hello. If you remember last time I came up with the idea of fractional ownership of real estate for the last project. Since then, I was studying like first of all, I studied like financial market in U.S., like how the stock market works and share works. And the other thing I did, I started conversation with people in real estate, especially people with experience in real estate, and kind of familiarizing myself with the existing issue and how blockchain and fractional ownership can like solve those problems. So I met very interesting people. There are some people who have like I met someone who thought of like fractional ownership, come up with a specific idea about it, and he was very interested in blockchain. So we are in conversation to creating partnership. And one of the things that I really like to like from the community is to like in terms of rules and regulation. And I just like since then I saw there are different kind of real estate project in blockchain. And I think one of them like just happened like I think 2 weeks ago. They tokenized a complex in Manhattan for just accredited investors. But personally, with blockchain, I was fascinated with the decentralization, like democratization. With this project that's currently happened, is not like that. Like a broker dealer kind of hire this company to like tokenize a building for a specific people, but that's not what like blockchain can offer. Like I want to see like normal people can come and like really invest in fractional real estate. So one of the like first question is like how is the current status of the fintech sandbox? Who's have been applied there? How like what we can get like what we can yeah, like utilize from that perspective, and also crowdfunding. And yeah, the dreamy thing would be to have a commercial real estate in Arizona, tokenize that like fraction of it, have a creating a fraction ownership on that, and like really starting something in real estate in Arizona. That's like what I really want to.
Cool. Well, why don't we talk about the current status of the FinTech Sandbox when Adam does his presentation, and maybe a little bit about equity crowdfunding then, and we'll kind of do an update. We will probably have Wayne Carroll joining us as well, who's a patent attorney, talking about a defensive patent strategy, which kind of plays into this whole realm as well. So cool. Thanks, Marjan. And how can the community support you and what you're doing?
Yeah, as like we like to know what kind of regulation do we need for our project, and any critics, like whatever people can see in the project that can be better, that would be great. Like, knowing the people comments.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just real quick to comment on a couple of things you were mentioning with that. You can probably find some pretty good information on the regulations and what does that look like for fractional ownership, because my understanding is fractional ownership of real estate's been around for a number of years, like for investment and all that. But my guess, I've never been a part of it, it's probably a difficult mechanism to get in and out of the ownership, whereas tokenizing it may be a good way to reduce the friction of that mechanism. And that's actually one of the best ideas I've heard yet for the FinTech Sandbox of Arizona, where so many of the ideas is it has to transact business outside of Arizona, so it doesn't work for the sandbox. But that's one where you could actually launch it in Arizona, buy real estate in Arizona, and have an investment pool or whatever. That's kind of cool. But I think you could find a lot of information on fractional ownership just through Google searches, because that has been around.
Yeah, I'm actually doing that as part of the incubator I've been setting up. And actually, as a result of the first blockathon, was basically have the incubator, and you could either buy a piece of it by buying these utility tokens, and then you can start using it to pay the rent. So whoever wants to buy into the token, this is basically a utility token, almost like miles on an airline. So, but I tried doing this sandbox thing, and looked like, to me, it was, I don't know, just didn't meet my needs. Because they were really looking for different kind of people that need to do that. They're looking for well-established companies, and they're going around all over the world, trying to push it, and yet at the same time talk about being in Arizona only. So it just, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. I don't think they know what they're doing. Anyway, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a conversation to have with the policymakers and with the Arizona Attorney General's office about the FinTech sandbox and the application and so forth, because it's let's put it this way, it's everybody understands, I think, that it's an iterative process, and the first cut at it,
It's a fishing expedition.
it's that, but it's also the unique thing that we have is we do have an open conversation now, and I think we have, people are listening all the way around. What's going to work? And I've run into some similar issues, let's say, with my application process. So anyway,
Okay.
Good.
We can bash them later. Yay!
Okay, Jason.
How's it going?
You look very tropical back there.
Sorry, I'm just getting up. Not usually up this early. So I am associated with a couple of projects. The main one right now is a project called Nori. We are, over the past about year, running closer to a year and a half now, we've been working on a project where we build a marketplace where we have a matchmaking system between people who are removing CO2 from the atmosphere, like sequestering it into soil, to direct air capture machines, things like that, with people who are actually like emitting or want to just even offset some of their carbon emissions. So it's effectively a very simple set of smart contracts with an application that interacts with it. We have a couple of things going on in parallel now, one of which is a pilot program where we're trying to reach out to as many people who are actually supplying the removal of the carbon. So we have I think between 10 and 20,000 acres right now for the pilot program kind of lined up, and quite a bit more with a couple of other very large companies, very large farm companies basically. And then we also are just trying to kind of match that process with buyers. So big corporate people, big corporate enterprises who have that kind of corporate social responsibility factor to them. So large airlines like JetBlue, et cetera. Anyway, if anybody's interested, there's a couple other campaigns going on, so feel free to talk to me about it.
And that's how the community could support you, is find out about the campaigns that are going on, how to get involved. Cool. All right, Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I actually don't have any active projects. I have a background in hardware and software development, both in the commercial world and in the government world. I was one of the major architects when we architected something from concept from a $9 million test demo to an $87 million project for the National Guard. I have a background in satellites and so forth. But what got me interested in blockchain was my stepdad kept yapping about Bitcoin, and I'm not interested in currencies at all. I'm actually looking to focus primarily, we're in a venture capital accelerator program with a law firm, and we've kind of shifted into really looking at supply chain and really going after and just programming on the Ethereum blockchain. We are forbidden from doing ICOs for whatever reason. So we have to work with the existing ones that are there at this time. But just kind of here to learn. And for me, I think one thing that Jay said that just absolutely resonated was simply do it. So we are really moving forward to implementation. We have some business cases that we're looking at. And for me, it's really sharpening up the code to take it out of conversation into the marketplace, see which ones hit. I have a pretty strong background in marketing as well. So, and then secondly, anything we can do for humanitarian aid to Africa in particular, we'll be just doing that. And that's just a core value that we have. So.
Cool. How can the community support what you're up to?
I think just listening to some of the possibilities that are out there, like just understanding what blockchain can and can't do. It's something that we're sort of unique. We're sort of trying to understand, because the only way I can see how it's just a different form of distribution. The anonymous part I can understand. Certainly there's some benefits to it. We're probably not really hung up on the needing for anonymity necessarily, but you know, what can it do from supply chain, from creating more efficiencies in, we're looking at imaging technology. I happen to be a drone pilot as well, looking at, you know, how can it affect insurance. I'm also a claims adjuster. You know, how can these things apply somehow in the trail of authentication? I think that's a little bit of what we're looking at as well. But we're open. But certainly we're really looking at understanding, like you said, the use cases that you made a good point on, understanding, getting them out there, and looking at the use cases and business cases, and then just having the skill set just to implement it. We are bootstrapping. We're not taking investors. We've turned down investors at this point. So for us, it's contributing, and it's just doing boots in the ground.
Cool. And you've become interested in IPFS, right?
I am a big proponent of IPFS. I'm a big proponent of it. When I looked at it, it's something that we actually talked about years ago that we didn't have a name for it. And I'm sort of struggling between needing to get dusting off my programming skills and seeing the incredible power of IPFS. And it's probably, I can't believe they weren't doing it before, I'll be honest with you. I can't believe they weren't doing it before.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And that's, for people that don't know, that's the Interplanetary File System, IPFS.io, which is part of a whole suite of protocols and projects by Protocol Labs.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
once we saw it, like I said, we talked about something similar years ago, and to see somebody actually implement it. So it's kind of really learning Ethereum. I'm kind of between refreshing JavaScript, Ethereum, and Interplanetary File System. That's literally what I'm doing night and day kind of thing right now.
yeah, I think a big part of the reason that IPFS is happening now is because of the development of Golang, with the basic structure of that. And for those of you that don't know, I've been doing a deep dive into Golang, and it's kind of very much inspired by something called Plan 9, which was, I think, an AT&T construct,
Yeah, it was.
and that never really went anywhere. And just kind of like Unix kind of died and was taken over by Linux. Plan 9 has been eclipsed by Golang, and now with Golang available as a reference implementation it opened up the real ability to fulfill on the idea of this really decentralized content address construct.
It's amazing. I mean, when you really think about it in theory, it's mind-boggling. And yet there's a simplicity to it. It's complex, but there's a simplicity to it. It just makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I've been playing with. But actually, IPFS is sort of almost like it's not going to reach the power potential that it has, because there's still some problems with the protocol that is trying to be fixed now. It's not fully decentralized. So there are other protocols that are competing with it that a lot of people are starting to look at.
Yeah.
So maybe I should talk about that later. But I love that IPFS, but there's still some huge structural issues with it that is trying to be fixed right now.
It's very ambitious.
Yeah, I have to say this, I think for me, but I don't see blockchain as totally ever being anonymous. I worked at DC for years, I don't really think anything is totally anonymous, I don't think anything is totally free. There is a middleman, even if it's miners between you and somebody else. I think that it has its place. The same way I think IPFS does. I think all of it has its place. The question is how it can be linked up and who's going to be, at the top. So I don't think one is better than the other. I just sort of went, oh, I can use that and connect it to a couple things that I need to get done, and it'll implement it. And then, what's the next phase, as you're saying, nobody quite knows what's going to be the next iteration of things. So for me, I think one thing that I build my use cases on is what if we have to change? What if something is going to, phase out, phase in? But IPFS, I can see the benefits of it right now. And if it changes, then you just switch it to something else. What comes in.
I mean, so this is kind of a thing where it's, so part of the stuff which interesting about blockchain, I think the most interesting one was like, I think Filecoin or something, which basically tokenized all this, excess like storage space on all these hard drives around the country. I mean, it's the same with blockchain, verifying all this excess capacity using economy of scale. I mean, you're distributing all this cost to make it down to a thing where it's negligible, where you're talking about pennies. And that's the interesting thing here. Like, to the point, do you really need these servers running all this, basically doing all the mining? Can you do it can you distribute it to excess like processing power on all these smart devices or home computers that just want to be part of the chain? So that's kind of where I think it's going, where you're trying to get rid of excess capacity, try to mine more of the thing. But yeah, you kind of like hit a button with me when you said the middleman and all that cost. Like, once the stuff is, becomes very ubiquitous, like you're not going to really worry about.
Well, I don't mean the cost. I just mean that, like, in the sense that the public is, oh, blockchain doesn't. This is just this is what I'm hearing. Blockchain doesn't cost anything. Okay, yes, well, bank is that it doesn't cost anything. I'm a big proponent of that, but it's not necessarily, or if things come in necessarily, always going to be that way. Or I do agree that technology will enhance what you're saying, and it's probably going to be negligible to something. But I guess the thing that is for me is I'm choosing to be open-minded. Maybe that's the better way to put it. I don't know what the real truth is. I don't know what that. So I'm trying to build my user cases where what if X happens, Y happens, and Z happens in the technology or in the cost factor. How can I adapt to that? But I'm not blocked.
You're dealing with an economic case here, externalities, where that factor is not in the price of something. The best example is pollution, like where these arguments value climate change,
right?
Like or garbage, like those, like the waste component of what you usually pay, buy every day around here at a grocery store, like. Those aren't usually factored in the price. So I think, except when you use California, where like they ban stuff with a charge for using bags. But like that's kind of the thing when you have a right to consumer. That's something that's dealt on the public good side, where with government, where you're trying to have taxes deal with that, and it's not factored.
Right. I get that. And by the way, I live in California. That's some of why my thinking is,
yeah.
Oh God, So it's more of a precautionary thing rather than it could go either way. Because most of it I agree with you on. I just need to be able to go, oh, if I need to shift, how quickly can we shift?
Yeah.
So, cool. All right. So I didn't actually introduce myself. So turn this so you can, and then you can present.
Why is this backwards?
I don't know. Optics. Way beyond my capabilities. So I founded Desert Blockchain because I saw an opportunity to create like a ubiquitous registry for naming, addressing, numbering, and identity. I came from the telecommunications industry and spent a lot of time wrestling with how do you create sort of a global registry that can harmonize all of our disparate addresses, so that email addresses work with telephone numbers, works with Twitter handles, works with, you know, Facebook names and so forth. And we have control over it, not some third party or whatever. So the point that was wrestled with and is still being wrestled with is called end user opt-in enum, which stands for electronic number mapping. And anyway, I spent years and years on that. And then when I saw Ethereum, I said, aha, there's something really, really powerful here. So that's why I adopted, or basically did a deep dive into blockchain and so forth. And so what can the community do in Arizona to further this? Because even though, in my view, we have policymakers with a vision that's really, really strong and really useful, we need a bigger group attending events like this from the developer community. You know, I've heard that we've got like 60,000 engineers in Arizona. Okay, so what's it going to take for them to get out on the skinny branches and do something that's kind of risky? And the light turnout today is on my shoulders because I really fell down in promoting this blockathon, and I apologize for that. Our next blockathon will be in January, and I will properly get the word out, get the schedule out, and so forth. So I think we're having an awesome conversation. Don't get me wrong, the people that are here are, all of you are amazing. And us being here and going through these conversations is furthering what's available in Arizona and beyond. So, but one of the most exciting, and we're going to postpone the naive coin conversation for a while at least, because I think we've kind of set the stage to talk about what's possible with local motors. And in my view, Arizona, in addition to the policymakers that are talking about blockchain and decentralized constructs and basically creating these sandboxes that open up innovation to kind of mesh with the legacy regulations, one of our strengths is that we're now known as a friendly environment and ecosystem for autonomous vehicles. And I think we ought to be capitalizing on that and creating collaboration, because I think blockchain, in my view, could be like a decentralized, trusted source of truth, sort of like a decentralized air traffic controller for autonomous vehicles as well as other devices and so forth. And I'm really interested in pushing that forward. But within the autonomous vehicle realm, the awesome companies that are here experimenting and trialing, we have Local Motors, which is an absolutely amazing initiative and enterprise, in my view, not only because you're 3D printing autonomous vehicles that are crowdsourced and designed, but you're also, part and parcel with that, is experimenting with, okay, how do you finance this? How do you comply with legacy regulatory realms? And and then even beyond that is this notion of, okay, how do you reward and incentivize the community overall? I think one of the big subtleties and powerful points that we've experienced over the last 2 years is this phenomenon called ICOs, which is like this almost frictionless IPO, initial public offering, but you don't have to go through a lot of the regulatory friction. And I'm not saying that's bad, I'm just saying it's different. And this ICO, initial coin offering, has become this unbelievable source of seed funding for a lot of these, startups and innovations. It's also been a killer for a lot of these startups because, and I don't think a lot of people have realized this, but they've simultaneously, some of these companies and initiatives that have raised, 10, 20, 100 million, 200 million, they've effectively done their seed funding and exit in one stroke.
Before you've established that you really have value.
Before you've established anything, so the money actually and the funding actually becomes an anchor to the whole initiative. And I think one of the things that we've got an opportunity to experiment with the Ali funding through the equity crowdfunding and the FinTech Sandbox is how do we come to some sort of middle ground that raises some money in as frictionless a manner as possible, instantly creates an incentivized community around the project, and yet still leaves incentive and room for an initiative to continue to innovate and actually produce something that's, traditionally revenue operating, because that hasn't happened. This whole realm has been fueled, and the excitement has been from, buying low and selling high. Nothing wrong with that. Anyway, nothing wrong with that, but there's a whole bunch of innovation in the funding and the incentives and the ownership and all that sort of thing. And let's turn it over to you, Adam. I'll tee up your presentation. We'll talk about what's possible with the ollies and so forth. So let me screen share.
And so for some of you, these slides will be familiar, but I just kind of want to go through them for other people who haven't been through this presentation, just so you have good context of what we're doing. But yeah, this is about Ollie.
Do you want to advance the slides with this?
Sure.
It's just the up and down button there at the lower right-hand corner.
Okay. So with Locomotors, we believe a mobility revolution is happening, whether it's Ford putting money into autonomous vehicles, Volvo's concept for autonomy with trucks, even Uber for a while had an autonomous truck program, even on-demand consumption like Lyft, Uber, Bird, if you've ever seen the little electric scooters going around, or Line Bike. There's a revolution happening with transportation, mobility, and the perceived value. More of what we've talked earlier at the start of this. So this is why Locomotors, why we created Ollie, which is your friendly neighborhood electric autonomous shuttle. And this is Gen 1, which is currently in production in Chandler. It is the first co-created autonomous EV shuttle. It's based on a neighborhood EV regulation, so these go up to 25 miles an hour. They're all electric. This it's not like your standard EV where you're trying to get 100 miles. I believe this one gets like around 30, 35 miles. It's just it's designed to be an last mile transportation solution, what we've been working on in launch for the R&D is basically taking this and defining more of a use case scenario with further speccing this latest generation, which is, looking at how colleges will use it, how corporations, municipalities, resort and amusement parks. So really, not speaking to this whole, futurism thing of glamorizing what the future will look like with this, like looking at hard data from how people use for hire vehicles, how they use ride sharing, and looking at really what the statistics are of how people, like, what kind of product can you produce that, is basically a device that offers transportation as a solution. And it's more of this empty box strategy. What does it need versus what does a user want? So we're basically providing this, like we call it an ice cream sandwich. On the bottom, you have the robotics, the powertrain, all some electrical stuff that, and features that would be like a normal car. On top would be, your autonomy kit and your data management. In between is just whatever the customer wants. So we'll provide this box that, on the interior could be this empty canvas that, the customer wants us to configure however they want it. And that gets us to version 2, which is 3D printed ollie, where 80% of the structure is 3D printed. It's all electric, minimum at 50-mile range. Basically this idea of creating this iPhone of transportation.
How much can it carry?
So the gross vehicle weight fully loaded is 6,700 pounds. I'm sure we could handle a lot more weight, but that's right now with the range that we want. Topped out loaded.
So you can put a pallet in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to that, that empty box. You could basically have a lower section. You can put whatever you want in the middle, and the top part would house our autonomy kits. So, and if some customers don't want that, I mean, some would rather have people in there as stewards driving this thing. We have had talks about doing stuff where some projects were having it remotely piloted. So it's more figuring out what our customer will be comfortable with. But yeah, this is back a couple months during the beta builds. Hopefully next time I get authorization to actually do footage with the completed vehicle testing. Yeah, this is beta 2. The first one was crash tested, and then we're getting ready to plan the third construction to take these into production with the current Gen 1 component ollie. And that's where we get into the whole thing with the blockathon and this whole concept of using blockchain. How do you use the FinTech sandbox and crowdfunding to basically tokenize one of these projects? So the idea is that you would have funding come in from the community. It'd basically be an investment into one company. That company would could either own these assets and then distribute it out to a project for transportation, or it's basically another entity is basically leasing it to the group. And it would basically be distributed into these different phases from launch forth with design concepts, with the crowdfunding competition, prototyping, beta builds. They go into the local motors division or the microfactories doing production and deployment, and then the partners where they are using these out in the wild to sustain it and charging infrastructure, making sure they're clean, making sure that supporting the apps so for users to interface with it, and then all going back to the whole tokenization, how you do revenue sharing agreements so the profits go back to the people who own the tokens. And so this is basically initial framework with any kind of project we're doing. The concept of launch fork with doing this co-creation based in wherever the community is. So it could be here in Arizona, it could be out in London, it could be out in any city in Southeast Asia. The idea is that you have this model that can scale and be moved to whatever place it is. And as you're going along these competitions, depending on how big the vehicle build is, you basically create a micro factory to support it. So not only the production, but the service and other facets that come with deployment and sustaining in the marketplace. And the whole idea of this is how also that after a while, if this is no longer a viable thing, I mean, basically, we talked about with value, you can establish these coin or token values based on what, the engineering, the value of the engineering needed, as well as the how much the vehicle is going to cost. So you're trying to take all these initial things of just cost of designing and building these vehicles and using that as a starting point for how you would set a token or a coin. But yeah, when you have a,
So the percentages up here that I see, are those just kind of a rough idea?
they're a rough idea. I want to make sure I draw a disclaimer here that these are just to throw an idea out here that it's all dependent on what the agreement is between the partners, and then what's going to be crowdfunded with the community. So I have to disclaim this is not endorsing a specific partnership, a specific structure. This is trying to give a high-level framework of how you would do this, including the next slides where I use some examples of companies in the community of who you would look at doing this kind of stuff with. So I'm not endorsing anybody's specific business model or plan or the specific service that they do. I'm just trying to give some sort of concept for people to be, get some relatedness to.
Can you walk through the example? What does the 25 to 55% mean on community? Would that mean that's just an idea of what percentage of the total equity would stay with?
That could be a range of equity for how much the community owns in tokens. So this is like crowdfunding, like you or your neighbors or somebody else in the community, depending on how they want to fund it. I mean, in some cases, I would use a similar thing like a board of directors or like stock voting. I mean, this is kind of the similar thing here of how you vote. If you want the community to maintain control, then there's at least over 50% of those tokens are held onto. If there's a distributed thing here where you have a board where it votes, then there's flexibility. That's why it gets down to 25%. But then you'd have parts of locomotives depending on what they see value, or because you're trying to. It gets back to that value of what people wanting to do it or not. So in this case, Launch Forth would design it, but in some cases, what happens if there's a better provider to manufacture this than or microfactors? What happens if it's a larger product and some other contract manufacturer or another OEM wants to license it? The same with deployment and even out in the wild. So what happens if somebody like Target or Walmart wants to be responsible for the deployment? What happens if it's something like a fleet management company? So that's kind of just where these are arbitrary, trying to kind of look at what these models would be.
But the percentages are just kind of a thought case based on some ideas you've had, all your experience of it could happen this way, where these percentage range of equity end up being distributed through a token.
Correct. Right. And the example here where it goes into the investments, the contracts there's some flexibility there, and there's one thing which the original model of this was that we financed vehicles to companies who would want to use these. In some cases, somebody can come right out and just own these vehicles, and then when the use case is done, we just decommission them, sell them to somebody else, like a secondary market or third. The main reason why we want to lease these vehicles is the whole iterative process, so that people can get the most advanced technology, the most efficient vehicle. So they're out there for a year and a half, and then they get swapped out for newer ollies. We basically take the components, we basically pull the components off the vehicle, shred the chassis, reprint it, and then we could use the same components or send them to be reconditioned or just scrapped.
Right. Yeah.
So you can pull the GM later, right?
Not like that, what I think you're saying. But these are consumable, products. Like the idea is not trying to, cost save and try to get the cheapest vehicle out there so you have the most margin. You're trying to give the greatest value to the customers who are using this as a fleet.
So you're basically tokenizing an existing leasing situation, right?
Yeah,
It sounds like you're just taking all all these bean counters and basically saying, okay, we know how to do leasing in fleets. You're just tokenizing what already exists. So I'm just wondering whether there's a new thing going on here as opposed to not as simple as just tokenizing the existing paperwork. Because there's a significant amount of paperwork you're dealing with here, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of lawyers and bean counters involved in chicks getting this
I
far.
think the biggest thing here is on the design, concept, prototype, and beta, like what we talked about earlier. How do you track and fairly distribute value based on people's contribution? Even from startups, like the whole idea of like the concept with initial co-founders, how do you have you fairly valued sweat equity? Yeah.
I haven't looked into it, but I saw it. A friend of mine used it. I don't know how they're doing it, but there was something where you were crowdsourcing an invention. Is that, and it's online, and I don't know if it's still active, but you would have an idea, and then people would contribute to it, and then you would own a piece of it. Now, I was curious about the same thing, but I don't know if that is still active, but for a while it was, my friend contributed something to it. I can't remember the name of the website, but I just wanted to offer that up because I don't know how that they would be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, like if you're talking about like with IP and stuff, I mean, that's still like with these initial things, like where it goes back to the, the unique thing with Launchboard is the value added and the royalties involved with it. Because you have prize money for your design winning, but you have to get through some vesting period. So it's like similar things like how you would deal with stock agreements on startups. But the idea here is you're trying to give a long-term incentive program for having the best, the best ideas that add the most value. Because not only do you have an initial thing up front, but then also you have a recurring revenue later on once, it's successful.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem.
One thing, you got this hypothetical model drawn up here, so ignoring the percentages, but just getting the idea of the contributions and how it flows. One thing you keep saying is you want to be able to compensate or value based on contributions. And I think one component you need to also consider in this type of model is risk. Generally, people should be compensated on risk as well. So earlier on in that process, they incur greater risk. They should actually experience greater reward in the revenue sharing agreement. So like those first 3 blocks, if it falls apart at beta, the people that contributed money in design, concept, prototype lose everything, whereas local motors and production deployment may lose nothing because it never got to that point.
Yeah.
So the earlier on in the stages, the greater risk you incur, and so should get greater reward.
Yes, but I mean, you can think about it this way, that this is, there are a lot of startups that just fail.
Yeah.
They outright fail. And I think a lot of things, and I even think I would probably be even guilty with some of the projects I've been involved with, when you think about the Airbnb, Facebook, or Uber, or even Microsoft or Apple, everybody gets in this whole attitude like you're going to be really rich. And like people don't always forget that there was initial founders, but it took a large team of people to move that. Like you have people on your team that can get it moved so far, and then you have to find other people with certain skill sets to move it a little farther.
Sure.
And that's kind of that thing where most people don't understand. Like you have that initial value, but no co-founder owns like 51% of their company all the way to the end, so the IPO. Even that, like it's not feasible, and you have to distribute some of the equity to incentivize people to move it forward.
Everyone's a strong part.
Yeah, so I understand what you're talking about with risk, but like in some of these aspects here, I mean, the vehicle platform we've been working on with Ollie 2.0 is a platform that we moved to other vehicles. So we have an initial platform that we would look at using for each one of these cases.
That's a huge chunk of value that,
I mean, you have to understand that a decrease it, it starts increasing the value if we're able to scale it. And this is a thing where if you're going to these models where it's like, I forget, what is it, 1.5, 2 million, or how much was the max that you could raise for crowdfunding here?
5 million now. It
5
was 1.5 million, and as of August 3rd, it went up to
Yeah.
5 million.
So look at this, like, this is different from when you go into like the OEM, like for a passenger car where you select the colors and trim options. This is more like if you're going to buy like a bus or a truck, like you go and you configure this base platform for whatever configuration. That's pretty similar to what we're offering. The only difference is you have industrial design and then whatever else comes up that needs to be added to the system. We're basically offering this platform where people could start setting up a fleet anywhere in the valley for whatever their business case is, and then go from that. So like, I hope that addresses your idea about initial risk.
Yeah, it's not even this end result concept that you guys have that you want crowdfunding to participate in. It's what concept would you like to do? Here's a platform we can build off of.
Yeah, an example I use, so there's 3 things here. So like where I use iPhone and transportation is iPhone, like Apple really got this platform down that was able to create a lot of value to scale very easily, because you had the hardware there and you were able to create a development kit for people to build their own tools for developing businesses off of it. So that's part of it. The other issue of it with your crowdfunding is similar to how all the crowdfunding sites there, where they're establishing value because you already have an established customer base there who are going to buy this product once it's done. And the third component of it is like Amazon, where you're basically having this web-based, infrastructure for selling, distributing, marketing a bit. And that's kind of this thing where that's where I look to the whole thing of the ICO here in Arizona and the FinTech Sandbox, creating that infrastructure, how you create the financial infrastructure to make this work for people who want to create a business around this.
Yeah.
But locomotives will still own the factory, right? It's kind of like Apple. Apple just does all the development and everything, but they don't actually own the factories.
Correct.
So they're basically they just go get contractors to do factory. But you're the factory and the development, right?
Well, but you hinted that it's an open platform that if somebody else wanted to apply their own 3D printer, they could do that.
I mean, we have projects. I mean, you brought up the Marine Corps. I mean, we just got done with a demo with the Marine Corps with doing the HAT 2.0 platform.
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing. And there's ones where we've done with Airbus for an aerial drone. We did one with I can't remember, it was Domino's or Pizza Hut with the small delivery vehicles that had the pizza oven in the back. So like it is a thing that can move. Can be white labeled, I guess, is a way of putting it. And you just license that technology to them and they can run their own.
Yeah, but so anyway, what I'm trying to figure out is all of this is really all about the idea of doing the development, but not so much the factory that is actually putting this together.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So a lot of this is how do you find a more efficient way of meeting, market fit and value.
I think this is a good fit for the whole idea of the equity crowdfunding that we have here in Arizona. Because my thought is, I live up in Anthem, there's a Walmart. If you could have enough of the community actually want to invest in it, if they do invest in it, people are putting $5,000 a piece into this, they're going to want to use it. They're going to tell their friends to use it. So you get the community marketing. And of course you wouldn't go forward if you didn't have a good base of the community saying, yes, I want in. And then you could there's a Walmart in town, you could go to them and say, do you want this as a...
Yeah, you go to Walmart, you go to Honor Health, you go to Target, Home Depot. You could do, at the same time when it's not being used, you could use it for basically selling it to somebody like Salt River Fields for transporting people. You could have it like school children in the morning.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of things you could do with it. The thing is going back to that dead weight cost, the inefficiencies in the transaction for funding transportation. So I think I mentioned a little bit to you, this whole idea of like you're gonna have, are you gonna put more highways and roads in? Are you gonna put rail in? You have this long process of passing bonds, of getting municipalities to fund this stuff. And, some of them don't want to do it now because they don't want to raise taxes. They're too afraid of the last election being nailed on it, especially if the project goes awry. And so here you have an immediate way of getting product market fit for a community. And when the project's done or it's no longer needed, a community doesn't have value in it, you already have, and this is part of the value of the token, you have it based on how much contracts, so the subscriptions of users who are using this, the amount of advertising you're selling on the vehicle. You could, have somebody else come in and buy it and use their product, or, and unwind it. It allows for a cleaner exit instead of having to deal with all these legacy costs.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask earlier, you just mentioned again, you had a Starbucks cup, I think, shown on the 2.0 Ollie.
Yeah.
And that's rumored is going to be a major revenue area, cars of the future, the marketing, whatever that looks like inside of our vehicles, and even the mass transit or the little shuttles, things like that. Who, in your model, who do you envision owning that space? The vehicle owner, or you guys are leasing out the vehicle, but also get to lease out the advertising space?
So the primary one here, I forget the value, there's already a partner there that would finance these to the companies wanting these fleets. But this whole thing with the equity crowd, so let's say that somebody like Walmart or like Honor Health wanted to buy a fleet of it. The financing's there to them own the fleet, and they would send it out, to customers. Whatever, have an integrated part of their app saying, I want to go pick up these groceries, or I want them delivered. I mean, there's a ton. There's, I think, Neuro is one company here who's demoing grocery delivery in Scottsdale. But I mean, it goes back to whatever Walmart or Honor Health want that interior, want that experience to be. There's this other component, like going from that, this equity crowdfunding, all that allows basically the community to own a portion of that. And it could be less of a risk for somebody like Walmart or Target or, a restaurant chain, so they could buy in a piece of it so they're not stuck for the whole bill of leasing them or owning them.
So you're talking about the tokens for each individual use case, right? So like
For each fleet.
So like Neo, for instance, their deal is they have all the drivers and cars, and you can put whatever stickers you want for it, and they could be using it for Starbucks or Uber or whatever you want, and then they have a fleet, but they don't have the factory. So you're talking about this being a token of a use case, but Local Motors is still the factory. They still deal with getting the fleet going and all of that. Because I think what you need is probably another chart that shows, okay, who's the factory, who's the fleet agent, who's the use case, who's the advertising, who's the one that's funding all this, to kind of show the big picture. You know what I'm saying?
That gets into this and trying to go to one example.
Right.
So like in Phoenix community, you have Chase Field. So, having something, building a case that you integrate something with their API to have, the community funds this with Square One Concept that owns like a chain of restaurants, whether it's, Cold Beer and Cheeseburger, High Dive. Basically this is, it could be the people who crowdfund have a discount subscription service, or they own it for free, they get to use it for free. But that you have users immediately there, so they could go to Chase, buy a ticket for a game. Before the game, they go to one of these restaurants. They have a meal, they have some beers, they go to the game, and they can either go home afterwards, or they could go, back to the bar, whatever they want to do. Another case would be Tempe, with the city of Tempe and Tempe Marketplace. We're dealing with downtown Tempe, more and more construction, deal with traffic congestion of having, whether it's ASU, whether it's the students, whether it's, people who own houses there, owning this with Whole Foods or Target, and having a partnership with Tempe Marketplace as well. That's kind of the thing we're using this crowdfunding thing to fund a fleet of these, whether it's 2 or 3 or 10, however they want to do it. But you're having an initial thing of funding, the development of it into production, the production of vehicles and the deployment. And that value of those tokens go up based on the contracts and advertising. So so you don't immediately have this overinflation. You're trying to cover your base cost.
Have you already, you clearly thought through some of the use cases? Have you done actual market research on specific use cases, or you're waiting until there's actually somebody?
So I can't speak for some of the other people in the company. I know on the R&D side that I went through and crunched a lot of data on how, going back to how people would use this right now. So for hire vehicles, for you know, like Lyft or Uber, like what does that data look like in urban areas? Because part of this was speccing the range of this vehicle and what would be the cycles. Because this is supposed to accommodate 6 to 9 people. I don't think 6 to 9 people always be in there, trying to figure out like how you would optimize the route of it based on the users in the area. You know, where it's loitering area, where it's like main pass before it forks off to go pick somebody off. Because you're not trying to have this do 100 miles. You're basically trying to have them switch in and out, go and pick people up, come back, have it sit and loiter until like the person's ready to go back. So there's, yeah, I mean, research has been done on some of those current use cases of how people use for hire and even on like Uber and Lyft, like how that's broken down, where it's commuting, where it's going to work, where it's going shopping. I mean, you can even talk to some guys that find that people are using Uber and Lyft to take, you know, to basically be taken to laundromats. So you're trying to anticipate how people would use these. And you're not going to really know until you go through the whole co-creation process.
So your biggest competitors, Lyft, Uber, and especially Neo, because they have a whole fleet of all kinds of cars, as opposed to just one solution, right?
Well,
isn't that the problem? Or whereas you can do industrial stuff that they can't.
So those companies are looking. So they're always looking at building their own vehicle that delivers groceries.
Yeah.
Uber is looking at building their own autonomous vehicles. But right now, their whole model is using other people's assets.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and that's the problem is as you have more people entering, the value decreases, and then like you get into this thing, well, what's next? And it's kind of questionable where Uber's still going to go into. I mean, because they got rid of the truck program. I don't know where it really sits right now in their autonomous cars, or whether they're going to license it from somebody else and build it after what happened in Tempe. But they're also still looking at autonomous drones, and they're looking at like scooters like Bird. So it's kind of hard where they're going. Lyft, I know GM put money into them because they saw that there was more money in owning the fleets and leasing out the vehicles than there was just selling vehicles. So it's kind of this thing that we're in this thing that we already need. We're not trying to be like a traditional automotive OEM. We're just trying to solve a transportation issue locally in the community. Because like I said, this is neighborhood electric vehicle. It shouldn't go more than 25 miles an hour. And that's what it's spec for. It can go faster, but right now, like the development is, 25, maybe 35 miles an hour, keeping it focused on those localized routes. I mean, and one thing, trying to optimize that cost. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so it's got, my point is that this is sort of like to me, it looks like a super shuttle, let's say electric, right?
Yeah.
Basically, I don't want to overstep here. I'm just saying this looks like a super shuttle, but actually what you can be solving, I guess, is the opposite problem, where somebody can sit there and go, I wish there was an app that says, I want to go here to there. This is how much money I want to pay. And you go tell me whether it's Lyft or whatever. It could be anything, whatever that service is. Or maybe you should, this is how much stuff I got to bring with me. This is how much stuff, the weight of everything. Go figure it out. Oh, okay, you should go get a semi-truck versus this, and we'll get you there. Well, so this whole generic logistics problem should be Like, okay, you should have everything from multi-ton situation all the way to, getting home in a scooter.
Yeah, I think in some of the stuff you're talking about, that's kind of use application. I mean, you have to anticipate that. You're not gonna, I hate saying it, but consumers are lazy. They're not gonna want
Yeah.
to deal with those details. So you have to
Exactly.
anticipate that so that they get in the vehicle with their groceries and they go. You have to anticipate having a place for the cart. I mean, there's also an accessibility component of this, of having a ramp and then
Yeah.
a wheelchair. So there's a lot of work that's gone into this to anticipate all those use cases so we can figure those. And there's just that ease of use where you don't have to worry about that. Yes.
Are taking the crowdsourcing out and all that, kind of going back to what he's saying with the risk, is do you have a version that can be tested right now in Phoenix or soon? So in other words, that you can start collecting the data before?
There's vehicles out on pilot programs right now. That's Gen 1. There's one at University of Buffalo. There was one out in Chicago. I think we did some demos in Copenhagen. There's one at one university out in Springfield, the East Coast. There's a couple out in Australia. And there's a few more. I mean, they're out there and they're running.
Okay.
This one, our objective of the company is to build 3D printed vehicles. We want to do that because there's around a 20% reduction in weight, so we get better, and there's more energy efficiency. There's faster iteration, so what we learn during development or during customer uses, we can modify that on the vehicle. And there's also decreased part count. So in the case of mounting brackets and all that, we could basically print that into the structure of the vehicle. So it allows us to speed up the iteration of it, so where it gets more in a thing, what we're worried about in the field is software. And then when we're done with the vehicle, we could shred it and reprint it.
Right, I totally get that.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I can think of uses for that in several cases. But what I mean is, so you were talking about we're talking about risk and all that. From these, I don't know how long you've had the demos out there, but what kind of data, and I know somebody can practice, but are you getting the data that you need to go, okay, this is out there, how they're being used, so that you're answering some of these questions to reduce your risk and kind of know where these, oh, yeah, a person is always just brings on the groceries to it, or no, or, they're still doing lift more. Is there data out there to help you answer some of these questions?
So on the pilot program, some of those are not on those. There's just simple transportation routes. They're fixed. They have the autonomy kits on that, and they're just running those routes. On the data that we use, those are from actually like Uber data and actual stuff from LA, Chicago, New York, of how people used for higher vehicles, what the statistics are for distance as well as time.
Okay, so maybe I'm probably not saying it right then. Is there a pilot program that is out there that's using it in the model right now that you want?
No, not yet. We've been working on developing. I don't think I structured it like said earlier. With that beta 2 that you saw, this is this is the second version of this 3D printed vehicle that's being designed to deal with those.
Okay.
So we have one that's being Gen 1 that's just there to deal with this whole conversation, but this is Gen 2, this 2.0 is there to deal with that broader use case scenario. We're talking about the empty box.
Is it possible is it sort of that you have enough capital to do Gen 2, like a couple of pilot studies to be able to say, okay, and here's the data we got back from this to kind of refine it? Because it sounds like it's a great idea. I can see how it could be used, but it seems like you said the broader piece you haven't quite, and you can use other people's data, but you don't know how they're going to react to this. Is that sort of?
So we can go, I don't know if I totally follow you. I can tell you what's going on with the industry, that part of the biggest problem with autonomous vehicles is that element of trust.
Okay.
I mean, Google just, started launching their a limited use for self-driving for with the minivans they have around here. Okay. So trying to figure that part out. The issue that we're really focused on is building the platform that could be in that range, and then just have it be easily configured for whatever that use case is that people want. So anticipating what the customer and showing what it can do, because sometimes people don't really know what's possible until you show them.
Right. Do you have more slides, Adam?
I
can
just have two more.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah, these are, I mentioned the HAT 2.0 platform for the Marine Corps. So it's just a modular logistics platform where you could trade out the upper section for cargo or transporting personnel. And these other two are just neighborhood, these are island EV challenge. So what would be, a small transportation solution that you would offer in a fleet version on islands? Would it be a smaller ollie version that would be a little mini taxi, or something that somebody would just want to go get groceries? The last two is just hoping to get out of this from the community here. Application A would be a project tokenization. So the goal would, an application that can tokenize cash and project contribution, with a secondary that it distributes revenue to the token holders. And then application B would be asset utilization. So managing and track vehicle utilization for the subscription holders, and then the secondary manage the payments from the subscription holders as well as non-subscriptions through a wallet. And so that's everything I got, guys. Any more questions?
You said something about the limitation of like 5 million. What was that?
That was for the equity crowdfunding in Arizona.
That's a revenue.
So if you basically create an entity that would crowdfund to have a fleet of vehicles and the deployment, that's kind of just the budget you're trying to operate for a specific application.
And within that equity crowdfunding, there are some definitions for utility tokens as well as equity tokens that opens up a window for experimenting in the realm that has been problematic around the world, with the ICOs not being clearly defined as a utility token or an equity token, which has caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, and so this is kind of thing we're dealing with. Like in some cases, you want more of a utility token, and that's where you have the vehicles as the asset establishing that value. So you would be based on a price per vehicle, based on all the things that would be needed to, from concept to having it running out in the field.
So it's more friendly environment for crowdfunding in Arizona, or that's did I get it right?
Yeah, compared. So I don't know if you want to. I just want to say yes. It's more where they'll have that the sandbox situation. So you can do that without worrying about all the regulations and the legal costs of doing it. Some estimates I've got from lawyers is anywhere from it's a price of a Reg D, like 25 to 35,000 to deal with regulations and writing the all the stuff to support it. And then you're dealing with other countries as well that are trying to find a more efficient way of dealing with this, because right now the market's still in this thing of everybody's just stuck with the usual status quo of how you do financial instruments and technology. Like everybody's trying to figure out how to utilize this, and the problem with it right now is that I don't think people really don't talk about it, is that you start using blockchain technology, in banking and financing, it automates a lot of the stuff, so you don't need people. So this is a thing where you're getting rid of all these costs, and it's kind of these companies that have these bloated staff trying to justify everything they do. That's where the real pain and disruption is to the market, and the usual status quo of how you do funding, what technology you use for dealing with transactions. I'm trying to remember the name of the state senator or congressman we had here who was talking about his business from
Jeff Winninger.
Yeah, he said it best. Like he doesn't have, if he's using blockchain, he doesn't have to worry about his funds being held and having the credit to deal with all the billing and dealing with inventory. It's immediate, and he doesn't have to pay any fees for it.
Yeah.
So you don't have your ICO up right now, right?
What's that?
You don't have the token
No.
created, right?
I think we want to have all this established before we start that. Otherwise, it's, you know, we're getting the same thing with, when we're doing ICL, like when we have it established that we're going to do this.
Can you use a demo? Like, this is a naive question, Jason, I feel like. But can you create a demo, look at a smart contract, look at Ethereum to sort of get an idea, or is it, you know?
I think that's what we wanted to do with UAT, with doing that, for just, you know, having an initial thing and then go from that with a capstone project.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, like, you build that without having to deal with the regulatory, then you can, you know, you have the hardware and the
That's-
engine, and then you've got this piece that's already built up, so you're skipping a lot of that.
Yeah, that's part of what meant with doing application AEB, like whatever we want to do. That's the whole reason for today, coming here and seeing if people want to build that.
So, I'm up for it. So would that potentially look like an Ollie having maybe its own wallet, and maybe all the stakeholders have a?
It would be for company to company, because all it is just an address. You know,
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of a format where the Ollie only functions and moves when money's put into it, but tokens, and then a smart contract distributes that, you know.
but that's part of that, the application B of asset allocation, and then you have subscription holders versus non-subscription holders.
I think it's too easy to try to hold together owners and users, and I think in my mind, it probably makes more sense to keep them separate.
Yeah.
I mean, you're showing up as a user, whatever that agreement is for a user cost, you pay it. Even if you are an owner, you might have a different rate as an owner, or maybe not. But
I understand that. I mean, it's the economic argument of like dealing with, like, you know, you're trying to deal with surge pricing, you're trying to deal with somebody who's already bought a contract for this, use it, versus somebody who's immediately on demand wanting something. You know, am I gonna drive, you know, am I gonna drive to the game, or am I gonna just take a lift there?
Well, if I could interrupt, because there's actually another revenue component to this that's possible that I'd like to talk about, and at the same time address what you said is one of the biggest hurdles in this is trust, right? Because people don't yet trust that you can have a fully autonomized vehicle, right? So that brings up another topic, and I'm going to go to screen share and play a little video that we actually have an opportunity to experiment with.
This week, we're happy to bring you the EX8029 stereo camera module.